Dear participants, welcome. Today is 6th of March 2025. It is the day 1106 of the Russian full-scale invasion on Ukraine. I have the pleasure to welcome you to Practices webinar, Ukraine's Displacement, 3 Years On, Challenges and Prospects. Before we start, I bring to your attention the possibility of making use of interpretation. Please follow the instructions in the chat. This meeting, this webinar will be recorded as our previous webinars focusing on Ukraine, and next week you will be able to find it in the Practices repository on the Practices website. We have close to 250 registered participants for this event today. And we have planned for 4 presentations, each of them approximately of 15 minutes, followed by roughly 30 minutes of questions and answers. You can ask the questions already in the course of the presentations in English, Ukrainian, Russian. Please make them concise and clear. And at the end of our webinar, please remain and fill in a survey that will be displayed to your attention and active response. Once again, welcome to Practices webinar, Ukraine's Displaced, 3 Years On, Challenges and Prospects. My name is Nataliia. I am the head of the Practices Secretariat, the head of ICMPD, Eastern Europe and Central Asia region. And together with our participants, our speakers, we will focus on the current situation of Ukraine. 3 years after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, displacement remains one of the war's most profound consequences. Millions of Ukrainians have sought refuge abroad or become internally displaced, facing continued uncertainty about their future. While some have found temporary stability in host countries, many struggle with integration, employment, and legal challenges. At the same time, discussions on return and reconstruction are gaining momentum, but security concerns, infrastructure, destruction, and economic hardships continue to obstruct large-scale returns. So in parallel to our webinar today, there is a meeting in Brussels taking place of EU member states, together with the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, discussing the future of Ukraine in currently rather turbulent times. With this, I move to introducing our speakers briefly, starting with Franck Düvell, Senior Researcher at Osnabrück University, Institute for Migration Research and Intercultural Studies. Ms. Kateryna Sehida, Doctor of Geographical Sciences, Professor at the Nimes Department of Human Geography and Regional Studies at the Karazin Kharkiv National University. Nataliia, Huseiva, PhD in Geography, Assistant Professor at the Nimes Department of Human Geography and Regional Studies, also from Karazin Kharkiv National University. Mr. Jan Werner, Head of Unit for EUAA Affairs at the Department for Asylum and Migration Policy of the Czech Ministry of the Interior. And my colleague Martin Wagner, Senior Policy Advisor on Asylum at the International Center for Migration Policy Development. Without further ado, there's a lot of information that we'll be hearing today. I turn to Dr. Franck Düvell to kick off our webinar, outlining the key trends in forced migration from Ukraine, revisiting most relevant scenarios of displacement, and examining the impact of attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure and shaping new waves of displacement. Thank you. Franck, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Before I continue, please let me share my screen with you. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. And then the Presentation rules, yes. So, I will be talking very briefly about the current situation. You will be mostly familiar with it, I suppose. I will then carve out certain key trends and conclude with discussing a few possible scenarios. So first an overview over the current situation of displacement and mobility, then I move on to the key trends, then I look at migration prospects, so that what might lie ahead of us. Then I consider the impact of the destruction of the energy infrastructure on future or current forced displacement, to end with worst, and to also add some positive element, best case scenario. So the current situation, and you are all familiar with it, is that the Russian invasion, it triggered the fastest displacement worldwide. It all happened within weeks and a few months. It's also the largest in post-war Europe. At some point, up to 1/3 of the entire Ukrainian population was displaced, and still over 1/4 is affected by displacement. Journeys for most were well organized, often by way of mobilization, and we have to praise that. They were fast, they were safe, and they were legal, meaning that they differ very much from other types of forced migration, where people have to have crossed borders clandestinely, illegally, across sea in shaky boats and whatnot. So the case of displacement from Ukraine is a special case, which is very different from other cases. The current situation is international displacement. We have in the order of 6.3 million. There are 4.2 to 4.4 million Ukrainian beneficiaries of temporary protection in the EU. So the numbers differ a bit between Eurostat and the EU Asylum Agency. In non-EU countries, there are 2.1 million Ukrainian displaced persons, roughly 1.1 million in Russia, and 1.1 million in the rest of the world. And I'll spell that out in a minute. In terms of internal displacement, we have divergent figures. The IOM is estimating there are 3.6 million, but within Ukraine, the authorities have registered 4.6 million IDPs. In any case, this is now significantly down from a maximum estimate of 8 million. We also notice significant onward migration, either within the EU or from the EU. So in the order of 3.1 million people who migrated from the first to following countries, more than 900,000 migrated to non-EU countries like United States, like UK, Canada, Norway, and a few others. We also had onward migration, significant order from Russia. I estimate that 400,000 to 500,000 people who initially either moved or were deported to Russia, left Russia mostly towards the west, towards the EU, to either stay in an EU country or to actually move back to Ukraine. In total, return migration in the order of 5.4 million people was recorded, mostly IDPs, so 80%, but also 1.2 million people returned from the EU to Ukraine. What we also noticed from day one was a very high level of mobility. 40% of the Ukrainians in the EU traveled back to Ukraine, either only once or repeatedly. And we also see that 7% of the temporary protection beneficiaries who are registered had been registered already in more than one country, so they were moving on. Also, the level of border crossings between Ukraine and its western neighbors, including Moldova, is very high. So over 43 million border crossings were reported since the beginning of the war out of Ukraine, and over 40 million border crossings into Ukraine were reported. And this is excluding Russia and Belarus. So, having said that, some key migration trends can be identified. It is always important to recognize that before the war, there were already 2 million Ukrainians regularly in the EU, plus some irregular migrants and short-term visitors, of course. And also in Ukraine, still, another 26% already had pre-war migration aspirations. So they already considered or wanted to move abroad. This is a significant decrease, though, from much higher levels in 2012, where it was almost half the population holding migration aspirations. From mid-2023, the number of Ukrainians in the EU is quite stable, so between this 4.2 to 4.4 million. But the total figure still shrouds the dynamics of return and deregistration on the one hand, and fresh arrivals and re-registration on the other hand. So we have monthly fresh arrivals of 55 to 65,000. This is still significant. We all know that Ukrainians, in particular displaced persons, are highly educated, so 63% of the adults have high school education. Initially, the overwhelming majority of arrivals were women, 80%, only 20% were men. This has now changed slightly overall to more than 23% men. But in Germany, the proportion of men has increased significantly from 20% at the beginning to now 37%. Also, we see with minors that boys represent a slight minority, 16.5% as compared to girls, 15.2%. Also, there are more boys in the higher age group, 14 to 17. Since 2023, we also see a rise in irregular departures. And these will be mostly men who are not legally allowed to leave the country, which explains the change in the gender composition of Ukrainians in the EU. Now to the migration prospects. There are many surveys on migration aspirations, but unfortunately they all ask questions differently. They ask the questions in different countries, they ask them at different points in times, so that the survey results are not comparable. However, what we can see across all these different surveys is that aspirations have been shifting. So initially, 2022, 75% roughly of the people would say that they would like to return. This is now actually down to 34%. 64% still say that they have not yet adapted to host countries and conditions they found. The group of the undecided people is quite stable, around 1/3. So this is an obvious target group of policy interventions where policy might want to influence people's aspirations. The proportion of people who would like to stay have also increased significantly. It is now at around 34%. In terms of numbers, this is 1.4 to 1.5 million. But there are some surveys who suggest that it could be even 50% of the Ukrainians in the EU who would want to stay. And this is also reflecting the scenario, migration scenario of the current status quo. The people who are going to stay in the EU will subsequently also trigger family reunification, husbands or wives or children, rather less parents, I suppose. So that would add another out-migration from Ukraine in the order of 330 to 360,000. Plus, we need to keep in mind post-war labor migration is an opportunity for people seeking an income abroad. Now, my next point, the sort of impact of the destruction of the energy infrastructure on displacement. Russia is seemingly aiming to make Ukraine uninhabitable in order to get rid of unwanted populations, in bracket Ukrainians, and destabilize the EU by destroying the foundations of life in Ukraine. So over the course of the war, 80% of electricity system has been damaged or destroyed. Heating system, though, remains largely intact. That means that 900,000 people in frontline region are deprived of energy supplies of any kind. No electricity, no heating, and also no water. However, Ukraine had significant pre-war overcapacities. Also, there was a drop in demand of energy because many people have left the country, the economy is down, there was rationing of electricity supply, repairs were very, very quick sometimes. Then there are energy and fuel imports, generator imports, many million generators were imported, but also Western aid and delivery of Western gas and Western electricity prevented actually the collapse of Ukraine's energy system. So altogether it demonstrates enormous resilience of the Ukrainian authorities, of businesses, of suppliers, and of the people. And as a result, there was actually no impact measurable on forced displacement. If I show you this graph, you can see in winter 2023 and in winter 2024, when the impact of lack of electricity and heating would be harshest, the numbers of monthly temporary protection grant is actually going down to the lowest level in December 2024. So there is, fortunately, so far no impact. Now my last slide. Worst case and best case scenario. In the worst case, and we all hope this is never going to happen, that Russia is somehow allowed to win the war and occupy all of Ukraine, we take as a baseline that there are still 31 million residing within Ukraine. The precedence cases of people's response in the occupied territory shows that rather 50 to 75% will not want to live under Russian boots or Russian occupation. The exact percentage depends on the model that we use, but it will also be shaped by the type of Russian influence or dictate or occupation or intensity of persecution of Ukrainians once Russians would be in charge. So in the worst case, at least 9.5 million up to almost 20 million more people could leave Ukraine. Most of them, 83%, would move west. So in the west, we would receive another 8 to 16 million Ukrainians. Now, to conclude with a more positive outlook, in case there is not only peace, but also reconstruction, which comes with economic boom and with jobs, and in the longer term future, even EU membership, I would expect the majority of Ukrainians to go back. And here I also take the precedence of EU membership of southern EU member states like Greece, Italy, and Portugal, where the majority of the pre-membership people actually return home. And there I would conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Frank. As usual, your scenarios stimulate a lot of thinking. You've spoken about scenarios in our previous webinars. There also are policy briefs produced by you that interested participants can see, read, download from the Praxis website, including the brief on the energy sector in Ukraine. Thank you once again, and with this I would turn to our colleagues Kateryna Sehida and Nataliia Huseiva to provide us with a detailed assessment of internal displacement in Ukraine, highlighting ongoing humanitarian needs and the changing dynamics of movement within the country. Please, the floor is yours, Kateryna.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet all of participants of this meeting. And you know that internal displacement crisis in Ukraine, triggered by Russian full-scale war, has led to one of the most significant humanitarian emergencies in recent history. With nearly 13 million people, over a quarter of the national population, displaced within a matter of months. Historically, the roots of internal displacement in Ukraine can be traced in the annexion of Crimea and occupation of some districts in Donetsk and Luhansk region. The Russian war in Ukraine was launched in February 2014. The mass media sometimes talk about the start of the war on February 2022. However, it should be considered as the beginning of the active phase of the war, associated with the open invasion under Russian flag. Interesting that on 1st of March 2014, the Russian flag was raised on the building of Kharkiv Regional State Administration, to be honest, for a few hours, but by Russian citizens. And on the same day, the Federation Council gave permission for the use of Russian military forces on the territory of Ukraine. Exactly 8 years later, on the 1st March 2022, Russia shelled the same building of Kharkiv Regional State Administration. The war continues, and daily shelling of Ukraine continues. What is the main direction? What is the volume? What is the consequence of forced internal migration movements in Ukraine? We'll discuss for our today's presentation. Since the start of the full-scale war, millions of civilians were forced to leave their permanent residence places. And what is the main spot in time? In April 2022, according to the date, internally displaced person was higher and the number was more than 7 million people. Initial displacement was higher and in the end of 2022, but by 2023, return started to balance out displacement. The proportion of IDPs continues to decline, but it remains about 10%, meaning displacement is still a significant issue. The return process to slow down in 2024, possibly due to security concern, infrastructure damage, or difficulties in reintegration. Humanitarian support is still necessary for both, and for IDPs and for returnees, as 12% of the population remains displaced. In the 6 first months of full-scale war, over 3 million Ukrainians registered as IDPs. Most of them are in Dnipropetrovsk, Kyiv, Poltava, and Kharkiv regions in different districts. Despite the fact that at the time a biggest part of the Kharkiv region was still under occupation since September 2022. In the future, more and more Ukrainians would more not to the west of the country, but closer to home, to neighboring regions. Since the autumn of 2022, the majority of displacement persons have begun to gradually adapt. More than half of rent housing, another nearly 30% live with relatives or friends. Another 2 or 3% had their own housing in another region, and about the same number of Ukrainian citizens who took them each. Nearly 4% of all IDPs remain in modular town and temporary resettlement sites. During the second year of the large-scale war, the number of displaced persons increased only in Kyiv, as well as in Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Sumy, and Donetsk region. Among both and IDPs and remittances, the majority were women. It should be emphasized that the full-scale invasion forced the remaining elderly people to leave their homes too. According to the graduate research, the situation worsened. 18% of Ukrainians may decide to go abroad for a period of war. The share of those who remained at their permanent place of residence was the lowest in May 2022, near 16%, while 30% of respondents then left their permanent place of residence. The top three reasons for migration are their own safety and safety of family, of course. The third, a possibility attack of their resident region and direct military attack. And the top 10 reasons for relocation of Ukrainians are the major destroying the housing and unemployment. The largest number of IDPs resides in Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Kharkiv region also hosted the second highest share of returns, after Kyiv city. 37% of returns and 30% of IDPs were residing in frontline districts. It is worth noting that the vast majority of people who are forced to rest of displacement choose to move deep into the region or a neighboring region that borders the region of permanent residence. Also, a large number of IDPs are registered in Kyiv and Kyiv region. This can be explained by the significant socio-economical potential of the region and the best oil-air defense system in the country. The analysis in this brief focuses on the following 5 regions: Kyiv City, Kyiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Odessa, and Lviv regions. This list encompasses the 3 top locations per proportion of IDPs, Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk, and regions in the Kyiv City, Kharkiv, and Kyiv region, as well as Odessa region as the location with the highest percentage of IDPs intending to integrate in the medium term. Additionally, Lviv region was included in analysis at the location with the highest return in IDPs in the western region of Ukraine and higher proportion of returned Ukrainians from abroad. In general, among the main reasons for returning to their permanent place of residence, more than 17% of people not important in the security situation, for the 68% an important reason of the desire to be closer to family and friends, and near the 15% noted one of the main reasons for returning in the guaranteed opportunity to find job in their place of permanent residence. In general, it's the main tendency during the 3-year full-scale war. And what is the main challenges for nowadays enforcing internal displacement in Ukraine? First of all, it's economical issues like the people in need. An estimated more than 12 million people in Ukraine need humanitarian assistance, including almost 2 million children. This includes more than 2 million IDPs and nearly 10 million not displaced people who are severely affected by the war, according to returns. The highest concentration of people in need is in eastern, northeastern, and southern regions of Ukraine, where is active military action for nowadays is intense. The next one challenges is some issues in housing and living condition. For many Ukrainians who rent this home, paying for housing and utilities is heavy financial burden and take up a large part of their income. Among those renting, 1/3 of them spend more than 70% for their household income on housing, and while around half of those renting spend more than half their housing income on rent and utilities. In 2025, an estimated 115,000 IDPs in collective sites will meet camp coordination and camp management services, and plus near 7 million people need shelter and non-food item assistance, including more than 5 million non-displacement war-affected people, and near the 1.7 million IDPs. The next one challenges is economic issues and employment. In this case, should more pay attention about instability of social benefits, difficulties in finding work, discrimination in the labor market, and job loss and economic instability. Ukrainians' gross domestic product sharing by 28.8% in 2022. Although there was a slight recovery in 2023 with a growth of 5.3%. The ongoing war continues to hinder economic stability, particularly in rural and eastern regions heavily reliant on agricultural industry. In case of unemployment, we should pay attention for the working age IDPs and the main challenges in this case, because higher rate of unemployment as well as higher proportion of unemployment job seekers compared to returning migrants and non-displaced individuals. Those who had been recently displaced were more likely to be unemployed compared with those displaced for over a year. The next one challenges is social integration, tension and discrimination. In this case, we pay more attention about feeling of isolation and lack of support, stereotypes and prejudice, and insufficient support from local authorities. According to the IOM respondents' reports, nearly 13% responded social tension between different groups in their community, with Lviv, Chernobyl, and Ivano-Frankivsk region recording higher tension level. By contrast, 30% those within the host community who reported tension identify the unavoidable behavior of case IDP's case. I'm sorry. One minute, some technical issues. I'm sorry, is it okay?
Yes, I see your presentation now again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry. Okay, about social challenges. More than 19% of IDPs and 13% of returners reported that they are someone of their household had experienced discrimination during displacement due to not being local. Among both IDPs and returners, discrimination most commonly occurred in interaction with the local population and while interaction with local authorities. According to the data about the region of Ukraine, the most precious situation in the eastern and northeastern and the southern part of Ukraine. Most IDPs reported a low level of participation in the local decision-making process for nowadays. The next issues and challenges in case of IDPs is education and access to social services, and include limited access to medical services, problems with enrollment of children in schools and kindergartens, adaptation of children to new conditions. The war in Ukraine continues to threaten the right of education for estimated 1.6 million children, including children with disabilities. In 2024, intensified missiles attacks disputes learning for 1/3 of boys and girls nationwide, while displacement impedes the education of 14% of children. And about 70% of children in the East and 30% in the South continue to rely on remote learning for nowadays. Over 9 million people across Ukraine are estimated to be in need of health assistance. This includes around 2 million internally displaced people and more than 1 million elder people. The next one issues is psychological and emotional challenges. It includes traumatic experience and psychological stress, supports mobility syndrome, and lack of access to psychological assistance. 38% of respondents are at the higher risk of depression. The lowest proportion of respondents reporting symptoms of depression found in the Western region, and the highest proportion found in the Southern regions as well as the frontline regions. The reported experience of symptoms of depression was highest among IDPs, followed by returns and the non-displacement. The risk of depression was more common in individuals considering to move from their current location in the short or long term. Unemployment individuals appeared to be higher risk of depression. The next painful issue and painful challenges is returning to the temporary occupied territories. The conflict report on the return of IDPs on the temporary occupied territories. For nowadays, we have no official date. Some sources indicate that around 150,000 people have returned, in particular to Mariupol. Deputy head of the President's office has defined reports of a mass return of internally displaced persons to temporarily occupied territory. She stressed that the state has no date on such returns, as it is virtually impossible to return to the occupied territories due to close border with Russia and Belarus. And the last one, what about we propose thinking today, is the state intervention and support from international organization IDPs in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government has implemented various policies to address the challenges faced by IDPs since the onset of the full-scale invasion in 2022. These policies aim to facilitate the adaptation and integration of IDPs into host community, providing access to essential services such as education and employment, while also addressing psychological support needs. On April 2023, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine approved the strategy of state policy on general displacement until 2025. The strategy is adopted by the state in response to challenges of massive displacement of population caused by the full-scale aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. It fosters action to provide state support for IDPs at all stages of displacement, starting from evacuation during the process of social adaptation and integration at the new place in the host community, and may lead to the movement to return to home as soon as it will be possible. And of course, the support from international organizations for Ukrainian IDPs is highest. Critical use of the measure takes by the state and international organization highlight shortcomings in housing provision and effective resource allocation, which hinder is integrate and support of IDPs into host community. As the war endures, the efforts by Ukrainian government and international partners should shift towards prioritizing recovery and durable solution to address the long-term integration and reintegration needs of displaced individuals and communities in all, while also managing ongoing humanitarian response. In the same conclusion of our report, we would like thank you so much, and I would appreciate from all Ukrainians for the support, all our European, Americans, friends and partners. And for Ukraine, for nowadays, the question in case of IDPs is painful and is an important issue. And every day when war is duration, the number of IDPs can be higher, and the process of successful integration of host community and reintegration as a region is important and is difficult for Ukrainian. And of course, in the end of our presentation, we would like thanks again all our friends, all our colleagues for support. All Ukrainians really feel it, and of course, our word of thanks, Ukrainian defenders, because only with our defenders, we can live, we can work, and we can join to this meeting for today. And of course, we can believe in better future for Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kateryna, for your presentation. I can see in the chat there is also thanks from the State Migration Service of Ukraine for your support to the Ukrainians, as we all do, and we recognize the importance of the work with internally displaced persons, already also thinking of preparations for return of displaced internally and externally. Thank you for this. To participants, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will be collecting them. There are already a few. And without further ado, I would turn to Mr. Jan Werner, who will share insights from the Czech Republic's perspective, discussing national policies on labor market integration, access to public services, and long-term strategies for displaced Ukrainians in host countries, in the Czech Republic in particular. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will also try to share my screen. Here we go. I hope you can see it. Yes, thank you first of all to ICMPD for having us. We are happy to share our experience concerning managing the transition of Ukrainians that we have witnessed over the last 3 years. Pinpointing some things that we see as key challenges for ourselves in the near and longer term future, and finally sharing what we see as the key challenges in the next months in terms of continuing on the discussion of displaced Ukrainians. So I will start with a very brief look back. As you know, for us, managing the influx has two very distinct phases. The first one was at the very beginning of the conflict, when we saw a very important spike, or very high spike, and many arrivals from Ukraine, which then in time lowered. You can see this in the charts on the slides. At the beginning, it was really more than even 10,000 persons a day, but in 2 to 3 months' time, this slowed down to several thousands per week. Currently, the rate of arrival is about 1,000 persons a week. These last 2 weeks, it was even around 700, which is comparatively much lower. But we need to put it into perspective as well. Let's not forget that Czechia normally has about 2,000 applications for international protections per year. So if it's 700 per week, this is still a very high influx from our perspective. The total number of Ukrainians with active temporary protections, emphasis on active, because and I'll get to this, we review who is in the territory and who has possibly left or returned to Ukraine. The active ones are currently around 400,000 persons. So since the very beginning, Czechia has been a target country where people wanted to go. There is, of course, a mix of all factors that explain this. There was a pre-existing community. Czechia is relatively close to Ukraine, so it was easy to get here through Slovakia, or less so through Poland. And of course, we are a country with open borders, so there was no influx management when it came to entering our country. We have seen some interpretations that also mention a closeness of language or culture, but as I will explain, when it comes to the labor market, the data don't necessarily support this. It seems maybe a construction of somebody who doesn't necessarily speak Czech and Ukrainian, so that doesn't realize that there are quite important differences. It seems that it was more about the perception of Ukrainians in seeing Czechia as a good country to go to. So at the very beginning of the crisis, our priority was a quick reaction and making sure that all of the necessary services were provided to Ukrainians, mainly accommodation, registration, providing the necessary permits, and the basic needs. We proceeded using our crisis management system, so there was a very close coordination between all relevant institutions, a whole of the government approach, which enabled us to also leverage social support and understanding to provide to all the basic needs. The social cohesion and the social support for Ukrainians was indeed very, very high. Again, we see different explanations for this. We don't think this is necessarily a manifestation of racism. Rather, this was a very clear to understand crisis, and the Czechs felt supportive of Ukrainians in that it was very clear what is happening and what the problems are and why the people are migrating. Of course, if this is entitled influx management, we need to say that we couldn't really manage the influx per se. This is very important to stress. Again, we have open borders, and whether it is the EU or within the Czech Republic itself, it is very difficult to push against the flows of people when they have a clear idea of where they want to go. This is also something that we mentioned or we discussed at the European level earlier when it came to the big migration crisis of 2016, which doesn't frankly seem so big in perspective nowadays. But it's very difficult to push against the people. We can try to motivate them then to move on or maybe to consider other alternatives. But since the very beginning, we have accepted that people are coming to the Czech Republic in this case. From the charts or from the maps on the slide, you can also see the concentration within the country. As you can see, a large majority of Ukrainians are staying in Prague and surroundings. Compared to the population, there are also other more affected regions comparatively to other ones, but the concentration in big towns is very clear. Just to mention a few best practices that we developed based on this. Well, first of all, at the very beginning, especially, we took advantage of a one-stop shop solution for the purposes of registration, providing accommodation, giving people the healthcare insurance, referrals to social services, to labor offices, and also cooperating even with private providers when it came to requesting credit cards or mobile numbers. And this was all done as a one-stop shop solution within one institution. In other words, a person came from Ukraine, and in half a day they would be able to obtain everything they needed for their basic livelihood in the Czech Republic, and to maybe be able to organize the more sophisticated things such as education and so on. So this was very efficient. Also, since the very beginning of the crisis, we have managed to keep a very proactive communication. We have created new channels. We have also been able to develop a model where we didn't really try to centralize all of the information, but rather we tried to coordinate them to create a portal that would allow Ukrainians to access all of the services that were being put up by the various responsible ministries. And finally, and this is a best practice that concerns maybe more the later phase, we have again, as many of you may have already heard, this annual re-registration model where we annually request that people who have temporary protection re-register. This is quite simple. It's done online plus a personal visit to the office, but enable us to an extent to know who is on the territory and what the population that we are working with looks like. So now moving on to what we see currently as the key challenges. Well, first of all, the crisis, as any crisis does, has uncovered significant systemic deficiencies that we knew about, but of course having 400,000 persons plus in your country makes them much more visible. This has been since the very beginning case for accommodation. The Czech market is and was strained as is. So there are objective limitations to how many flats are available for rent and how many accommodation capacities we have. At the beginning, again, of the crisis, we were very much helped by the public support. People were offering up their own accommodation capacities, which helped us significantly to accommodate all of the Ukrainians. But at the same time, in the long run, it is still a problem, even though most Ukrainians are now able to access market available accommodation. The same goes for education and healthcare. As you can imagine, these are not sectors that you can scale up very quickly, very easily. So at this time, we usually say that they are sort of at their top capacity. It's obvious why this is the case. You don't grow doctors on a tree. You don't have them, on backup somewhere. So you can't easily call upon them to come and increase the capacity of the systems. At the same time, of course, there are significant financial aspects of hosting persons from Ukraine. We have received support from the EU. We have received support from international organizations, but the burden of the the financial support or of the cost of the crisis lies with the Czech state budget, which of course is a sensitive topic. We try to avoid simple discussions where we discuss how much the Ukrainians bring in and how much is spent Ukrainians, because it's very difficult to discuss. Very often we hear, positive messaging that Ukrainians are bringing more money than is spent on their assistance, but then of course we are comparing the taxes that are measurable with the direct support to Ukrainians. But of course, living here with us, they are also taking advantage of all of the services and everything that is paid for from taxes. So we think this is not a good debate to have, because it can further polarize the society, which is also a key challenge that we see. The public support, even though slowly, is declining in time. It's more difficult to communicate the needs of displaced persons from Ukraine. And of course, there is also the significant aspect of the political cycle. We have not had a parliamentary election since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. So currently, this will be a quite hot and contested topic one can expect in the upcoming election. And finally, but this is perhaps the biggest challenge, the conflict prognosis is very unclear, and as a result, also the temporary protection prognosis is very unclear. We also see increasing differences between stakeholders, because of course there are, the temporary protection people or people beneficiaries may have specific ideas of what they want to do, if they want to stay or if they want to return. But then, of course, there is the counter pressure of the Ukrainian institutions, which would want as many people as possible to return to the country once it's possible. We see, of course, other stakeholders' interests, as you can imagine, pushing towards other things. So this is also going to be a quite difficult debate in the future. A very brief piece of information on the Czech labor market. This is actually one area where we haven't seen too many problems. Since the very beginning, the Ukrainians have started entering the labor force. Currently, and as you can see on the chart on the left, there has been a steady growth of participation in that regard. Currently, we see about 150,000 persons with stable employment, which is about 50% of working age persons with temporary protection. Now, this is completely very good if we look at other countries, but at the same time, we see the problem with the quality of, let's say, market participation, in that usually the access is to lower level jobs. This is what you see on the right. And from the studies that we see, is actually the main reason is actually language barrier. So it's very easy to say that Czech and Ukrainian are similar languages, but they just belong to the same family. And unfortunately, people from Ukraine, even after 3 years, many of them are not able to access a better placed job in the market, which is unfortunate. There are projects trying to deal with this, but this remains a big challenge for the future. So finally, what do we see as coming up in the near future? Well, speaking for the ministry, so mainly in terms of receiving and managing people on the territory in terms of their stay per se. We try basically to work in a scenario-based fashion, even though currently this is quite difficult because the scenarios are difficult to discern. So maybe we could say that we are mostly preparing for different possible outcomes and situations. So maybe a situation-based or reactive approach. As you all know, because I'm sure you're following the news, it's really difficult to say what is going to happen in the future. There is a very wide array of possibilities, from continuation of the conflict as is to a frozen conflict to a ceasefire, but then of course we need to see under which conditions and so on and so forth. And of course we will need to react to that. If there is an additional influx of persons, then of course we are already discussing with the European partners what will happen in that case. But we think that of course the EU as a whole would be able to manage. If we go towards a ceasefire and possible improvement in the situation, then we also see the need to react very quickly, because that would risk, in fact, additional dynamic movements between the states from Ukraine itself, or dynamic returns to Ukraine. And we think this should be somehow controlled. So there would need to be steps taken to avoid a very strong dynamics in the short run. And then, of course, the other political discussion should follow to discuss or to decide what is the way forward in terms of returns, enabling certain people to stay, and so on. This will be a very politicized and a highly political discussion. It's not really for us to say what needs to be done. To an extent, this is truly a matter of high politics and broader policy. If the conflict stays as is, and of course, in the current situation, what we are envisioning and what we are already doing is this special long-term residence permit. This is already in place in the Czech Republic, enables a part of the temporary protection holders, specifically those that are self-sufficient, they don't need any specific supports, to apply for long-term residency in the Czech Republic. In fact, we have in the law, this is defined quite broadly, so we have left ourselves maneuvering space to adjust this over time as relevant and enable people who decide so and who wish so and who meet all of the criteria to remain in the Czech Republic. So should the situation remain unchanged, this is probably the scenario or the solution that we will continue with, keeping most of the people in temporary protection, but enabling those that wish so and can do so to slowly move on to different residence pathways. And I think I will leave it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation from the perspective of the Czech Republic, one of the main recipients of Ukrainian citizens per capita in the EU, along with Germany and Poland. From my side, we are very proud that we can support the work of national authorities in the Czech Republic and the other two countries I mentioned, also to support Ukrainian citizens by the work and services provided by Ukrainian consultation centers based in Prague, Berlin, and Gdańsk, Poland. Thank you very much. You have mentioned the role of national authorities and also the overall position of the EU when it comes to the temporary protection directive, about which my colleague Martin Wagner will speak right now. Martin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you see my screen?
Yes, you can also make it
Yes. Yes. So, sorry, I was shortly pushed out of the meeting during Jan's presentation. I hope that it will not happen now once again. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm aware that you already listened to quite a lot of information in the past three presentations. I would like to probably complement and round the series of presentations a bit by bringing a bit the European perspective in there. And share a few slides on temporary protection and the future of it, and probably also link a few things that Jan just mentioned before. So let me start a bit with a one step back and to also remind us what were actually the key elements that actually mitigated potential negative consequences of this large-scale displacement from Ukraine. And Franck mentioned the numbers that moved out of Ukraine. So on the one side, we had instrumental was, of course, or still is actually the visa freedom and the right to enter for Ukrainians. So yeah, Ukrainians can move 90 days within the European Union in the framework of 180 days. This was instrumental already up front. Then, of course, triggering temporary protection gave also the right to reside for a temporary time. I will come back to that in a second. Then, of course, we also need to take or to be wary. There was one small thing when the council implementing decision came up, because there's this right to move on, meaning from one EU member state to another was also made possible by lifting a specific article of the Temporary Protection Directive, which would actually enshrine a responsibility of the first country where Ukrainians would have been registered. So also this made it possible that people from Ukraine or from who fell under the definition of temporary protection first moved and could then still go on and probably follow opportunities that they see in one or the other countries, probably because of language, probably because they know from a university program in one country where they see this is more fitting to them than in the country where they are, or they move simply or followed the networks that they have. These are friends, family members, and so on. So this was possible by lifting the responsibility clause. And then, of course, reception and the wide range of rights that come with temporary protection, of course, helped in many ways. Also, employment. Jan just mentioned before how the Czech Republic also made it possible already with temporary protection and beyond. And I would also like to mention one thing that Franck at the very beginning also a bit mentioned. There's a special constellation which we don't have in similar displacement contexts, and this is this close ties between the European Union and Ukraine. So on the one side, European countries as hosting countries and Ukraine as country of origin. That there's a strong tie here, and also with opening the membership of Ukraine to the European Union is of course very different to other constellations, but it is also broadens also the possibilities in how we continue with providing protection or with providing longer term solutions. Sorry. God. We have a very automatic office here, and now it goes down the blender. I'm sorry for that. God. Unbelievable. So I hope I will not get completely dark now, but then we have a short recap of temporary protection. How was it enacted? So it's just to remind, it's the first legal instrument under the Common European Asylum System, and it was adopted in 2001. And you're well aware, the first time it was triggered was in the context of displacement from Ukraine on 4th March 2022. Now, how is it triggered? On the one side, you have the European, you had a proposed by the European Commission and the Council implementing decision, a qualified majority, and how it was actually perceived. So first for 1 year, and this was until March 23. Then there was an automatic extension until March 24, and then until March 2025. And then in the course of last June, there was also, of course, the awareness that the European Union, we had Parliament, so we had elections in the European Union, and then there was a bit of an uncertainty how quick could the new European leadership also respond to what happens after March 25. So it was quite early, prolonged for another year, for a 4th year until 2026, which means so we have 1 more year of temporary protection. But now I would like to come to more the essential thing. What I would like to share is how can temporary protection end. So there are actually from the directive, there are 2 ways how to end it. On the one side, the timeline ends. That would be at the moment March 26, or upon council decision, again, as it was triggered. So these are the 2 ways of how temporary protection can end. And I already, if you read the directive, you would read it's valid for 3 years. A very broad interpretation brought in this 4th year that we are currently in. Now, what does the directive see? What happens when temporary protection ends? The general laws. So the directive says very generally the general laws on protection and on aliens in the member states apply. So which means temporary protection ends, and there should be a transition into the national protection and laws on aliens. On the return side, there is a reference to the preference of voluntary return, and also very interesting, exploratory visits are explicitly mentioned in the directive, which is also something that in other displacement contexts it's not necessarily the case, that member states have the possibility, if somebody returns, that you also make it possible that people can have this come and see visits. And then there's also a reference that temporary protection can also be extended the timelines if it is somehow connected to return programs, so that you have a longer time to remain after temporary protection ends if it is somehow part of a return program. Some member states also enshrine this into the national laws, actually. Now, overall, the challenges when temporary protection in this Ukrainian context ends is mainly also concerned with the numbers that are involved here. And in an earlier paper that we produced in ICMPD, we also tried to compare, and actually Jan just before told about the yearly influx that in the Czech Republic is there from international protection seekers, compared to the number that are currently under temporary protection in Czechia. And this is also in the main hosting countries. You see this. The number is much more than the national administrations can take if all of them would directly, after temporary protection end, for example, move into the asylum lane or into a national residence permit. Now, then we also have very different profiles. We have vulnerable people among them, elderly, sick, people with disabilities, and children. And with regard to return and with regard to stay, I just mentioned before, the number is also very much influencing on the capacities in host countries to really process, if temporary protection ends from one day to the other, to process several thousand or even a million of people international lanes. But also, if all would return, the capacity in Ukraine might be also challenged. And Franck, in his initial presentation, also showed the impact on the infrastructure because of recent attacks. Now, that means that essentially it will be and is to find modalities of gradually phasing out temporary protection. And I would like now to have a few words on EU policies here. So far, and I alluded to this in my introduction, actually, at EU level, there was mainly, I would characterize more as pragmatic approach, meaning rather to prolong for one more year and give the European Union and its member states time to think of how to facilitate the transition from temporary protection. There was one idea that circulated by Mr. Ascher. This is the reconstruction permit. This was the idea to give a long-term, this was 10 years actually, the proposal here, to give a long-term perspective, because against the background of awareness that the reconstruction in Ukraine will last long once the war is over and the next step can go on. But we have also currently the Polish presidency, and in this, in the course of the Polish presidency, there's also a certain focus on working on solutions. What happens after temporary protection? In EU countries, and this was actually the nice a link over to what was just presented on the Czech example. At EU level, there are already some movements where you see that some countries already building bridges from temporary protection to national residence permits. In some countries, this required some changes. You saw this in Latvia and Lithuania, for example, that you needed to change the laws, that it is possible to have an in-country application for beneficiaries of temporary protection for a long-term or for a national residence. But very often you see also these linkages between that somebody needs to have employment and a certain length of residency here under the temporary protection residency until that they can also transit international employment permit. So in mostly you will always need to have a bridge into some national permit before you can also have a long-term residence. And this is also, you cannot move directly from temporary protection in a long-term residence. And just there's also a tendency to narrow the eligibility of temporary protection for newcomers. This is something that you also see more and more debated in countries. On the return side, I can keep it rather short. There's hardly any discussion yet. Usually speaking about spontaneous and assisted voluntary returns. It's go and see visits, and also linking return with post-war recovery and reconstruction is the main tendency at the moment. I will here just mention or revert to it. I think also that the focus complete on return. I'm also not so sure whether this is in the best interest of Ukraine. Very well understanding that Ukraine is interested to get back, that people come back to Ukraine, but at the same time, the capacities of receiving back many people at once is a difficult task. And we just heard in the presentations before also the big issue with IDPs and their prospects of return and how to return. Now, my conclusion would be just a few points that I try to stress. Overall, temporary protection has in its name and its purpose, it should be temporary. And a long-term temporariness is bring us a lot of uncertainty to the people concerned. This must be very clear. And I think to those who are beneficiaries of temporary protection residing within one of the EU countries, they also feel it, because also with employers, if you want to have a job that an employer invests in you, is also not very fortunate if your status is only temporary. Whatever decision will come, what happens after temporary protection, I think we need to be wary that this closing door panic we say in German, that you feel the panic that you have to quickly jump into one or the other solution because some door might close could happen. Therefore, I think flexibility and especially generous transition time from temporary protection into other schemes is necessary, and therefore also very much speaking of phasing out of temporary protection to avoid these bottlenecks in capacities. And I said in both in Ukraine with regard to return, but also in host countries with regard to longer term perspectives. And I think there's also much to learn from national transition schemes that are currently already implemented, but also from past experience. And we saw this also with Brexit. There was a very generous, long transition period, and I think we might even need a longer one for Ukraine, in the case of Ukraine. And I think it is also once a participant in a discussion said, we need to look actually first at the vulnerable groups, those who are in employment and those who are quite well established in the host countries. They will find the way in one or the other way, but vulnerable groups might have difficulties and they will need a lot of attention from us. And I think with this, I would like to close my presentation and also stop sharing and look forward to further discussion.
Thank you very much, Martin, for your presentation. There's not so much time left, so I will try to quickly go through the questions that were first chronologically. First, the questions were addressed to Franck and related, if I'm not mistaken, to Ukrainians in Georgia and their transit to Georgia via the Moldovan border. I think this is a subject of interest maybe for our further webinars, and if there is more need or interest in this topic, I believe we can get in touch with the colleague who asked this question, along with the authorities or representatives of the migration authorities of Georgia and Moldova who participate today, and design another webinar on this very subject. Then there were questions addressed to Kateryna and Nataliia that relate to the discrimination, first I would like to ask the return of IDPs to the occupied territories. There was a question that would be of interest to me, to the front line areas. In which oblasts are there returns, which are the largest ones, and what would be the reason for people to return back to areas prone to shelling? Kateryna, Nataliia, please.
Hi. I'll try responding to this question. According to the studies, about a third of internally displaced persons, slightly more than 1.5 million people, returned to the front line areas, the 30-kilometer zone from the front line. Predominantly, we are speaking about Kharkiv Oblast, Kyiv Oblast. If we take into account the state border as a risk zone, and also Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Well, now speaking about the reasons, mostly it's due to social and economic reasons. People failed to integrate within the local community. They failed to secure jobs, to find accommodation. And this is like a snowball, one problem after another, and that's why people went back. Or their friends told them that, it's livable. We're still staying here, so you can also come back. So among returnees, there are many families that have children. And that is why, speaking about returns to the occupied territory, there was information on the slides, temporarily occupied territories. The slides showed that there were statements made by politicians that about 150,000 persons returned to the temporarily occupied territories. However, Irina Vereshchuk and representatives of official authorities said that there is no exact information, and those who were trying to present that information later on also denied it. They say that there is no justification for this data. That is why when we're talking about return to the temporarily occupied territories, it's very hard to give any numbers because there are no official corridors to go there. And it is also very hard to trace this data if we're talking about people who are traveling from Moscow through Sheremetyevo, because it's also risky. That is why all this data about returnees to the temporarily occupied territories requires some confirmation. It requires better sources. And having said that, it is impossible to say how many people return.
Thank you very much for the answer. I started asking a question regarding discrimination of refugees and whether there is a survey that would provide the information in which host countries the discrimination was at highest levels. But honestly speaking, I'm not sure to whom this question was addressed. I think it came somewhere between Franck's presentation and
I can take this question in the context of Ukraine. So in our presentation, we provided the data that about 13% of the surveyed, and the surveys are organized by International Organization of Migration. They did that randomly using phone calls. They are asking them the relevant questions. And according to the last survey data, 13% of the respondents mentioned that they faced social discrimination. So what are we talking about, right? There are multiple reasons for that. I would like to point out that this is not an en masse phenomenon. We do not have a big issue with that. We do not have a huge social tension between the IDPs and local communities. Yes, maybe some IDPs heard some reproaches regarding the language that they speak, because people who were displaced from Luhansk, from Donetsk Oblast, Kharkiv Oblast, basically from the eastern part of the country, predominantly speak Russian. And it is possible that people made some comments about the language that they speak. And there might be some tension, which I cannot even call discrimination, more of a social tension due to economic side of things, because such a massive displacement of the Ukrainians to the Western oblasts resulted in increasing prices for housing. And it basically impacted not only IDPs, but also people who always lived and resided there. So, this also caused some negative feelings because they came and therefore it resulted in growing prices. Because, many IDPs are probably viewed in the local communities as competition when it comes to jobs and labor market. Probably also the hosting communities are not happy that IDPs are getting some aid from international organizations and local communities. But, some local residents also need some aid and assistance. So these could be possible reasons. I cannot say that there are any religious reasons, though, that, some belong to the Moscow Patriarchy, the others to the other one. No, I haven't heard anything related to that, that there would be any religious-based cases of discrimination. And I would like to say that if we look at the western regions of the Ukraine, there are quite a few Catholics there. And Catholics usually are very peaceful when they're interacting with the Christian Orthodox. Because I saw there were some questions regarding religious beliefs. No, I cannot confirm that there was any religious discrimination. So this is what has to do with Ukraine, with some example of discrimination and tension. I hope I managed to respond to your question, and maybe other presenters can cover the situation in other countries.
Thank you very much. Anybody else ready or willing to take the floor on discrimination? Otherwise, there is still a number of questions that I might try to summarize or prioritize. One of them, or a few of them, addressed to the Czech Republic, to Jan Werner, asking about whether you would be ready to tell more about the mechanism of interagency cooperation as a response to the migration crisis. And by the way, I would also mention a question related to for how long is the special residence permit valid, and what is the estimate that how many people will be eligible for the special residence permit in the Czech Republic?
Okay. Given the time, I will try to be very quick. So as concerns the coordination at the very beginning, well, we activated our crisis management, which is something that's foreseen by the law, where there is the central crisis committee, which convenes under or at the level of the government, where all of the interested parties, including our department, are represented, and which discusses at the, let's say, higher level of coordination. Under which then there was a operational center, let's say, which I believe was mainly run, but I believe it was more run practically by our civil defense mechanism, which is basically the firefighting corps, with, again, the representation of all relevant partners, including ourselves. Then I would say that our ministry played a certain role when it comes to other mechanisms, such as the coordination, which I mentioned, within the field of communication towards Ukrainians, where we were, let's say, one of the proactive members, again, through these official channels, to start a discussion and maybe start creating, the various partial coordination mechanism for specific fields. Understand this is not too detailed, but again, given the time, I don't think I would go with this further. About the special residence permit, long-term stay permit. Currently, we are releasing this for 5 years, so it's not short. It's a significant amount of time. After which, if the person decides to go for this long-term residence permit, and then they can gain a permanent residence permit, and potentially, of course, in the due legal deadline, they can also apply for citizenship. So there is a clear path towards stability in the Czech Republic in that scenario. As I mentioned, within the law, this is sort of defined quite flexibly. So the conditions to apply are not set within the law itself, but then they are decided separately, which means that currently we have opened this up for people who meet quite, I wouldn't say strict, but they are also not loose criteria for being truly self-sufficient, because of course once they are in this long-term residency, they are not able to access the supports specifically offered to temporary protection holders. So we want to be sure that they remain stable. And we expect and so this is something that we expect for the starting period, and we expect maybe tens of thousands of people to apply for this. It's not a very high percentage in terms of our population. I wouldn't call it a pilot, but we are starting with, let's say, a primary case. And we expect that if this works out, we may consider loosening up the conditions in the months to come to allow more people to enter this transitional program.
Thank you very much. There was another question addressed to the Czech Republic regarding the renewal of the temporary protection status, whether it is annually as in Italy or Portugal, which were given as an example.
Yes, again, I will be very quick. Yes, this is done annually, but I saw the comparison, and this is what I was mentioning. I think this is one of our best practices in that we do, in fact, see the person for the renewal. So they apply online, and then they get an appointment, and they need to come to see us. So we have a control over who are the persons who are still on the territory and those who may have left. And we know that many other countries have sort of people staying in this gray area where the temporary protection is prolonged, but nobody knows if they are truly in the country or not. This is why we also see in the Czech statistic this zigzag pattern where it also goes low once the renewal is done. And they are also issued a new visa sticker, because that's how this is done. So, which is valid for the prolongation of the TP, and then again, this being done for a third time now, so it's year by year by year.
Thank you very much. I will now limit the questions and answers session to 2 questions. One will go to Martin, and one will go to all and will not be a simple one. But to Martin, I'll read out the question from the chat. The Council Directive 2001/55 EC established that one of the conditions to give temporary protection is that persons can't return to their country of origin. So is this condition met when the people deliberately go back to their country and still be there for a long time? Martin.
Well, yes. Indeed, I think it is in there, but I think it's actually it's the timeline that is there that is has an ending. If the person returns, there have many countries dealt very differently with it. For some countries, they deregistered after a certain time. The person stayed in Ukraine, so the benefits were not anymore retrieved. And then, if the person comes again out, the person is still under temporary protection, and this is how it is. The construct of temporary protection is like that the person is still a beneficiary of temporary protection. So I think actually, in fact, it is a very unbureaucratic way to do it, because back and forward movements we have since the beginning of the war, especially in neighboring countries, and I think in this regard it is actually a good and pragmatic way to do it, because the amount of people, as I said, is so many, and in this case, I think temporary protection directive fulfilled very much its purpose in this way. Just one more small thing that I also mentioned before in my presentation. Also, I find it actually also quite remarkable that in the directive there's also foreseen this possibility to go back and see how it is after temporary protection ends or towards the end. And this is in other displacement contexts, and when they have international protection, actually by many countries actually excluded. So you would lose your status, but not with temporary protection, as it was practiced by nearly all countries.
Thank you very much for this answer. And the last question will be to all. It will be a complex summarizing the questions from the chat the way I understood it. And please, each of you, choose the element of that question that you find the most relevant for you and try to share your views. So it ranges in the scenarios from prolonged stay in host countries or even increased influx if the situation gets worse in Ukraine, to the scenario that there is a ceasefire and return will be possible for the integration and reconstruction of Ukraine, while in between is the interest of Ukraine to receive all its citizens back, and potential interest for both countries to integrate some of those who are suitable for a given labor market. It's a very broad question. Please select an element you would like to speak about and share your views in few sentences, if that's possible at all. We start with Franck, please.
Okay, that's a very big, broad question. So in the case of forced migration, the key driver is, of course, security. If Ukraine is safe to return to, then more people will sort of more favorably consider return. The second biggest driver is economic conditions, which is job and income and businesses. So if there is a post-war reconstruction boom, maybe even a gold rush, I expect a significant number of Ukrainians to take advantage of that. They want to be there, they want to take advantage, they want to contribute and all the rest of it. And the third major driver is family members. Where are your family members that you want to reunite with? So husbands still in the country, parents still in the country. That matters a lot in people's migration decisions. And in terms of policy, we have attraction on the one hand, and we have deterrence on the other hand. So the more attractive conditions in Ukraine are, with any respect, political rights, fighting corruption, economic opportunities, the more favorably people will look at the return. And the more deterrent conditions are, security is not there, economic construction is not there, then returnees will face reprisals. People who evaded military conscription will face fines. The fewer people will look favorably at migration. So this is the balance, and policy can shape all of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll then turn to Kateryna with the same question, maybe also broadening it a bit with extending it a bit with.
Yes, for sure. Of course, Ukraine is interested in bringing back its citizens. Prior to the war, we also had quite big demographic issues, and they deteriorated during the war. Over 6 million people left. And we all understand that the longer the war continues, the fewer people will be willing to come back. Europe will not be able to kick them out by force because it will not violate human rights, and Ukraine will not be able to pull them back by force either. The only option, Franck mentioned safety, family ties. So the only option to attract Ukrainians back is some motivation, economic motivation, as you righteously mentioned. We need to create the conditions so that Ukrainians feel that they want to come back. Because here and sure families are willing to go back, because children are integrated in the local host communities, go to kindergarten, schools, universities, learn the language, and fewer and fewer people are willing to come back. That is why if Ukraine post-war becomes a flourishing state and will be able to offer the refugees good salaries, the vast majority of people will be able to come back. And it also depends on what they have behind in Ukraine. If their territories are occupied and if they lost their accommodation, it will be pretty hard to bring people back because there's nothing for them to come back to, because they probably have closer ties with the hosting country. So the longer the war continues, the more challenging it is for Ukraine to bring back its citizens, unfortunately. Thank you.
And general, of course, I agree with this opinion, with this trend in our situation. Unfortunately, for nowadays, abroad live there are many young people and young women and young men, and there are many children. And of course, if they have successful integration in host community, it's very difficult to come back in Ukraine. But maybe for some cohort of population with good professional skills in maybe tertiary sector after war, in case of post-war resilience reconstruction, we have more possibility for the Ukrainian labor market is the main motive for comeback in Ukraine. And of course, if some members of family live here, and of course, if housing condition, living condition in region of origin is normal. I can say good or peaceful, but is normal, not destroyed for nowadays. But of course, its question is very painful for Ukrainian in all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nataliia and Kateryna. Jan, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I would agree with my first speakers now that yes, it is very much a matter of creating favorable conditions in Ukraine. We also expect there to be return programs, and again, we would very much welcome at least a coordinated, if not a EU-wide approach to supporting returnees. We have already seen some first initiatives in that regard, also from the Ukrainian side, but this is of course to be seen in the future. At the same time, I would maybe be more pragmatic when it comes to talking about the, let's say, in this case, pull and push factors for return. It's not just about convincing people. We must be realistic. We are working with a broad range of stakeholders, and some people may be pushed to return even if they don't wish to. I think this is an uncomfortable truth that we need to face. It will not just be about convincing everybody to choose their path and so on. This will be about balancing interests, and we'll probably find a solution that will be tough for a portion of the people who may wish to stay and they will be forced to return, or they will not be allowed to stay, which of course will ultimately mean that they have to return. This is simply the case. Also because, it is in our common interest that Ukraine is successful, and this will not be possible to achieve without portion of the people returning. At the same time, of course, we need to be realistic on the other side as well. Not everybody will return. This is clear now. So it will truly be a very careful balancing act. And if nobody is happy at the end, probably we have reached a good compromise on this as usual.
Thank you very much to Prague and Martin. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think mostly it has been said. I think probably two more points from my side. Flexibility will be necessary in many ways. I think what we need to try to avoid on the one side is that what I tried to say before, a bit clumsy, that it is not for people either they take now the opportunity to remain, and because if they would return, they could never come back. So I think there we need to build in some flexibility for the future, that you can return, you can build up your future in Ukraine back, but you also have then again possibilities to move. I would like to have one more thing, and I want to just pick up. I think a concerted approach will be very, very necessary not only with regard to return, but also with regard to conditions to remain after temporary protection or not. This is all the things, because we also not only want we want also to avoid these secondary movements in other countries, that they move from one country to the other, and there's a competition between countries and where people can find their best future, which is legitimate per se also, but I think we need to guarantee that the situation is comparably the same. And my last point, and I think it was mentioned before, I think children is the group that is the future for Ukraine, and there's also a lot that we need to take care that we take both into account, that they can finish their education and all these kind of things, but also that there's a possibility that they can go back.
Thank you very much for your answers. I really appreciate the information shared today. Thanks to the speakers, thanks to participants. I see that there is a comment on Ukrainian refugees in Georgia. I would like to invite Monica Yaranosta to contact us via email so we understand fully the request and we can follow up. As Practice Secretariat, Practice Migration Observatory will continue focusing on Ukraine, supporting Ukrainian efforts, and your feedback is of utmost importance for us to design next our initiatives in a corresponding way. So thank you all. Please stay a few more moments. There will be a survey for you to fill in. And I thank you once again, and I look forward to meet you next time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.